Hey everyone, welcome back to 996 The Howl. Now, before things start to get a little bit crazy, let's finally get the Coyotes trade bait board up and have a discussion about it. There was a trade last night between the Coyotes and the Leafs with Carter Hutton going to Toronto, but not really going to Toronto because he's still going to be in Tucson practicing and maybe getting some games. He's going to stay with his family in Arizona, but he will be owned by Toronto in case they need a goalie, in case one of their current goalies go down to injury. Bit of a weird trade, maybe. It was a little bit of a sweetener due to the fact that Dzingel got claimed off of waivers by San Jose. So the trade reads now that the Coyotes traded Labushkin for Nick Ritchie and a conditional third round pick that could be a second round pick in 2025, and maybe also Carter Hutton. But yeah, it's a strange one. But Bill Armstrong really appreciates Carter Hutton. They're friends. Bill Armstrong is trying to get Carter back into the NHL, giving him a 1 year deal with the Coyotes to get his career back. It didn't work out, but Bill Armstrong is keeping Carter with his family, so it's a nice feel good story for Mr. Bill Armstrong. Let's get into the trade deadline. I honestly think it's not going to be too busy for the Coyotes. They really don't have anyone to offer besides the first two players in Kessel and Chychrun. And my point of view is that Chychrun isn't going to be traded at the deadline. It's more of a summer move if he even gets traded. Bill Armstrong will only trade Chychrun if he gets exactly what he wants, which is what he did for Kemper, what he did to Dvorak, and what he did for OEL and Garland. He only did it to get exactly what he wanted. He didn't sell low on the player. He got exact or even inflated value for pretty much all those players. I mean, looking back at the Dvorak trade, yeah, that was a highway robbery. Also, the Coyotes are in a situation where if they do acquire a cap hit, which Bill Armstrong has said publicly, saying they're going to look into doing more of what they did in the summer, acquiring a player with a high cap hit to relieve some teams' cap hits, and also getting draft picks for doing so. But they can't improve themselves too much because they're also tanking. So it's a mixed bag of what's really going to happen. But for me, Phil Kessel has to be traded. He will get traded. They need to maneuver it around where he doesn't miss a game. I don't know if that affects his Ironman streak. If a player gets traded and misses a game because he's traveling or hasn't made it to the new team yet, I don't know how that all works. But maybe they'll have to maneuver it so that Kessel gets traded and doesn't miss a game for the Coyotes or his new team. I always used to say a first round pick for Phil Kessel. However, a lot of teams are going to be selling this trade deadline. I don't think I've seen a trade deadline like this where literally all the teams are selling. Like, no one is competing for a playoff spot in the East. Whoever's in their spots are the playoff teams. The closest team after the playoff line is Detroit, and they're like 10 points behind Boston and only one game above NHL 500, and they shouldn't even be in the playoffs, so they're not going to be buying at the deadline. In the West, you have Anaheim and Dallas competing for that last spot that LA holds. And then you have Vancouver, who's in a tricky situation because they shouldn't be buying and they shouldn't be trying to compete for the playoffs. They should, in fact, be selling and just retool and just get their heads shaken a little bit and get a clear plan going forward. So they shouldn't be trying to compete in the playoffs. So they could also be selling. They got a couple not young, they got a couple good players to sell off. Garland's name's been thrown around. JT Miller's been thrown around. So other than Dallas and Anaheim, every non-playoff team currently could be a seller, and all those teams have really good players, and that could drive the price down of Phil Kessel to a second or third round pick. I heard a rumor a couple weeks ago that the offer for Phil Kessel for a second round pick is on the table and no one has taken it yet, which kind of, sours me a little bit. If Kessel gets traded for a third, I mean, if it's not going to be a first, it better be a good second round pick. For a third round pick, Kessel's got a lot to give. If you put him on a team with good line mates. He's on power play number 2. He's a great playmaker, great passer, and he still hustles. So he's got still a lot in him. Maybe his shot has decreased a lot over his time with the Coyotes, but on a good team, it could rejuvenate him. He's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. It's Phil Kessel. Come on, give it to me. Jacob Chychrun, like I said, Phil Kessel's doing pretty good, 33 points in 50 games. Chychrun, I don't want him traded, and I don't think he's going to be traded, but I've learned as a Coyotes fan, where there's smoke, there's fire, and the rumors for Chychrun have been wild just the past couple of months. Florida was heavy in on Chychrun, and now it's kind of turning to the Los Angeles Kings are in on Chychrun. The Florida trade doesn't really make sense to me because it revolves around their goalie Spencer Knight. Lundell, who's like a third-line centerman who's doing really well for the Florida Panthers, and a first-round pick. But what are the Coyotes going to do with Spencer Knight? They don't want to be competitive next year. Maybe the year after next year, they also don't want to be too competitive. So they're just going to be wasting Knight's, career. Where are they going to put him? They can't put him in Tucson. He'll just dominate there, and he doesn't want to be in the American Hockey League. So that really didn't make sense. And the rumors have shifted from Florida now to LA. And then LA rumors are Velarde, Turcotte, and a first-round pick, which I like better. But at the same time, Velarde and Turcotte are trying to be NHL mainstays, and they're too good for the American Hockey League. Velarde is a point-per-game player on Ontario Reign. So those players are going to be in the NHL next year. That significantly improves the Coyotes' forward core. So then again, you're not really tanking if you're acquiring really good prospects that have a high ceiling. So not sure what the Coyotes are going to do with this trade. That's why I think it's going to be a summer trade. A lot of thought, processing, and planning needs to be done to trade Jacob Chychrun. It can't just be a whim on trade deadline day. So I don't think he moves, but he's there on the board just because everyone's talking about him. And then after that, I put Boyd and Larson because the Coyotes are going to have a logjam at center once Larson gets healthy, and Beagle's going to be healthy by the trade deadline as well. So you'll have Schmaltz, Galchenyuk, Hayden, Boyd, Larson, and Beagle. That's 6 centermen. They can't all play center. So it makes sense. Oh, and Riley Nash. So, there's a lot of centermen, not good centermen, but these players could be moved. Larson, if a team's looking for a fourth-line, responsible centerman who kills penalties, Larson could go for a third or fourth-round pick. Travis Boyd is having a career year. He's not going to be in the top 6 for the team he gets traded to, but if you need a third-line centerman, maybe a fourth-line centerman with some juice, some offensive upside, Boyd could go for a third or a fourth-round pick. But other than that, the main attractiveness for the Coyotes is their deadline day cap space, which is $34 million. Bill Armstrong, like I said, he's open to acquiring contracts to help teams out in return for additional draft picks like they did in the summer. So I put together a list of players that are expiring free agents this year. They're pretty much useless on their team currently, and they won't make the Coyotes as good, except for these two, currently. So they could still tank, acquire these high cap hit players. The team that's going to get rid of them really doesn't need them. They could use the deadline cap space to acquire a better player and put them over the edge for the playoffs. So I was, if you watched my Scorched Earth rebuild video last weekend, I said that the Coyotes could be in play with Nick Ritchie. A couple of days later, it came true, so why not? Why not? Why can't I be right again? They're not going to acquire all these players, obviously, but maybe one or two could work. So we start off with Vetrano in Florida. He's got 16 points in 40 games, so pretty weak. He's got a $2.5 million cap hit. Plays on Florida, is not doing much on Florida. He's not even on the lineup sheet that I could find. So, if Florida wants to make a move to acquire a better forward or better D-man, they need to shed some salary. Vetrano could come to the Coyotes and won't really move the needle too much. And if we also get rid of Kessel and replace him with Vetrano, it's kind of a wash. So that's a good example of, a competing team needs to clear up some cap space to acquire a better player. Vetrano's not really helping them at all. Give him to the Coyotes and a draft pick. The Coyotes don't really get better acquiring him, and also acquire a draft pick. Darren Helm on Colorado, surprised he's still playing hockey. He's got $1 million cap hit. The Avalanche are obviously buying at the deadline. They're in talks with Claude Giroux. They need to do some cap movement to acquire Giroux or another good player. So $1 million right there. Give him to the Coyotes for a third-round pick, and they get nothing in return. That's a wash. Helm is not helping the Avalanche at all. Then you have Ian Cole on Carolina, a third-pairing defenseman, making almost $3 million as a third-line pair defenseman. If Carolina wants to buy at the deadline, if some of their competitors in the Metro Division are beefing up, they can make a trade, but then they would have to clear out cap space. And Ian Cole comes to Coyotes, can play defense. The Coyotes are really, thin on defense. They just recalled Kolyachonok in response to the Lyubushkin trade. So they could use a veteran NHL D-man to give their younger D-men more time in Tucson and not have to make them play so many NHL minutes. Then you have Michael Stone in Calgary. Same sort of scenario with Ian Cole, but he gets paid a lot less, only $750,000. He's not even playing. He's getting scratched in Calgary. If Calgary wants to make another move and they need to move out some amount of money, $750,000, and Michael Stone's been on the Coyotes before, so that's kind of a feel-good scenario there. Then you have Sevier on Edmonton, who's a forward making $750,000, just like Stone. Edmonton went out and got Kane. It worked. They're now, pretty positioned to make the playoffs. They're third place in the Pacific Division. If they want to make some other moves, they really don't have much cap space to do so. So this is an easy player to move out and bring in a better player. Sevier doesn't really help Edmonton. He's not part of the depth forwards for the Oilers. So that's a scenario that could happen. And then Raffle for Dallas. Like I said, Dallas is still competing for a playoff spot. They should be competing. They shouldn't be selling like Vancouver. So if they want to make a big trade and shed some salary, Raffle's making $1.1 million. And he's only got 10 points in 43 games played. So he's not really helping the Dallas Stars there. And the Dallas Stars only have $1.1 million in cap space, trade deadline day cap space. So they could trade away Raffle, double their cap space, and acquire a good player to put him over the edge. Because, I'm not for certain the LA Kings are a definitive playoff team. It's a toss-up between LA, Dallas, and Anaheim. I could see any one of those teams going on a run and making the playoffs. So, if Dallas wants to buy at the deadline and beef up their team, they could get rid of Raffle. It doesn't really affect them much, and get a better player there. And then we have Vegas's conundrum with Riley Smith and Dadonov. Dadonov has another year at $5 million, whereas Smith, this is his last year at $5 million, but he wears the alternate captain A on his sweater. If Vegas decides to rest Stone until the playoffs, then they won't need to trade Smith or Dadonov, but there's a lot of teams biting at the heels of Vegas. They already lost their top seed in the Pacific to Calgary, and Calgary's really turning it on. I think Vegas needs Stone back in their lineup. They can't wait for him to come back in the playoffs like the Lightning did with Kucherov. So they have a tough decision to make because they have Martinez and Stone on injured reserve, and they can't bring one of those players into their lineup due to the Jack Eichel trade, who carried a $10 million cap hit. So they got to get rid of one player to fit both of them in. That's a tough one for Vegas. If they decide to stay packed and not bring in Martinez or Stone into the playoffs, then they won't need to trade Smith or Dadonov. Dadonov would be the better player to give up for Vegas, but he carries that extra $5 million next year. I don't think the Coyotes are that, excited to take on another $5 million in salary next season, but maybe they look at the math. They're gonna, have $5 million exiting their salary one way. So bringing Bandit off, and it may be a wash. Just thinking, Kemper, the buyout is 1 million, or the retainment is $1 million this season. So, there's some money going in and out for next season. Maybe it works. Maybe it makes sense for the Coyotes to bring in Dadden off. But we'll see. That's a huge cap hit and a lot of salary to take in. And then finally, Howl, who's a defenseman on Toronto. As we all know, the Leafs and Coyotes have been, talking a lot lately. The Leafs need a little bit more improvement on their defensive side. Lyubushkin is not going to help them. The fans have turned on Howl. He makes $2 million and is a third pairing defenseman. We all know the Leafs are cap strapped. They need to make some moves. Their window is right now, so maybe they trade Justin Holl to the Coyotes, free up $2 million, and really push for a high ticket defender on any of these teams that are selling at the deadline. So that's it for me on the trade deadline day. I really don't see the Coyotes being too busy. There's too many moving parts. They really don't have anyone to give. They sold everyone last summer. I was gonna put Galchenyuk, maybe Andrew Ladd, but Galchenyuk, he didn't play well until like 10 games ago. So no team's gonna take a chance on Galchenyuk. Andrew Ladd, who's a veteran presence and a leader on a team that's going to be going far in the playoffs, can play on your fourth line. He's had a little bit of a resurgence. He's playing hockey at least this year compared to last year. He's got 6 or 7 goals, but he just got injured last game. We'll see how long that injury is, but again, too much of a high cap hit, and he's not expiring this season. He has one more year next season at $5 million, so it's too much. And the only good players that they have available are Chychrun and Kessel. They're not going to trade Keller. Bill Armstrong says he wants to keep Krause. Fisher has literally no trade value. I could see Fisher being traded for like a 5th or 6th round pick. Absolutely no trade value in Fisher. And then Schmaltz, he's got $5.8 million for like 4 more years. I don't see any team taking that right now. That's another summer trade. So they just have Chychrun and Kessel to give. Like I said, I don't think Chychrun is going to go at the deadline. Maybe in the summer, hopefully not. But Phil Kessel has to go. He's not re-signing. He's a UFA. He's a good player, a Stanley Cup champion, a locker room presence. Everyone loves Phil. So please get a first, or at the very least, a good 2nd round pick. Maybe Dallas, who's like on the fringe of the playoff line, gives their 2nd round pick for Phil Kessel, and then they don't make the playoffs, and then that 2nd round pick is pretty good. Something like that if you're not going to get a first. I think a first is a bit too, head in the sky wishing, but, at least a 2nd round pick for the hot dog man, please. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.